Good evening, and welcome to Red's Classic Theater. A decade after making Sabrina, William Holden and Audrey Hepburn traveled to Europe for their second film collaboration. Hi, everybody, I'm Red Robinson. Our movie this week is the 1964 comedy, Paris When It Sizzles. For a movie that was supposed to be light and amusing, its making was a series of nightmares. We'll have more on that later. Now, Act One of Paris When It Sizzles. This week on Red's Classic Theater, we're featuring Paris When It Sizzles. Tonight's movie came into being for two simple reasons. First, Paramount Pictures had William Holden and Audrey Hepburn under contract for one more film. And second, both actors wanted to work in Paris. So the studio called screenwriter George Axelrod, who'd crafted the screenplay for Breakfast at Tiffany's. He borrowed the title from Cole Porter's I Love Paris, and he borrowed the story from a French comedy. Now, to control the notorious drinking habits of William Holden, he brought in director Richard Quine. And we'll have more on that when Red's Classic Theater returns in a moment. Director Richard Quine had previously worked with William Holden on The World of Susie Wong. So the producers assumed that he could control William Holden and his drinking problems. But it was not to be. Though married at the time, William Holden was carrying on a lukewarm affair with French actress Capucine, and he was also pining for his co-star Audrey Hepburn, but she was married to actor Mel Ferrar. Now, the frustration of this circumstance was one of the reasons for Bill Holden's drinking, but not the only one. We'll have more on this in our next segment. Now let's return to William Holden in Paris When It Sizzles. Hope you're enjoying Paris When It Sizzles this week on Red's Classic Theater. William Holden had plenty of reasons to seek comfort at the bottom of the bottle. His unfulfilled love for his co-star Audrey Hepburn, his aimless affair with Capucine, and his marriage to a bitter wife. But there was another more personal reason: impotence. Already unable to father children, this new development further underlined the contrast between the real Holden and his suave on-screen alter ego. The result was an actor who often arrived at work in no condition to perform. Eventually, William Holden's alcoholism became so severe that he'd lose control after just 2 drinks. And before tonight's movie wrap, he was admitted to a clinic to dry out. Now let's return to Paris When It Sizzles. Paris When It Sizzles is our feature movie this week on Red's Classic Theater. Filming for tonight's movie began in July of 1962, and just as production got underway, Audrey Hepburn was notified that her Swiss chalet had been broken into. The most personal items taken in the robbery were her Oscar for Roman Holiday and her underwear. The thief eventually turned himself in, saying he was motivated by his passion for Audrey Hepburn, and that he felt by stealing her possessions, he would get to meet her at his trial. But there was none. The judge gave the thief a small fine and released him, saying, "Love is no crime." People in Europe found it amusing, but Audrey Hepburn did not. Now let's return to Paris When It Sizzles. We're presenting Paris When It Sizzles this week on Red's Classic Theater. Tonight's movie includes several uncredited cameo appearances by some big names. Tony Curtis's work went uncredited. In fact, he invented most of his role himself and stole the show in the process. Director Richard Quine also called in a marker to get screen legend Marlene Dietrich involved. He gave her a white Rolls Royce for her time and trouble. Even Audrey Hepburn's husband, Mel Ferrar, had a small role in the film, but his role behind the camera was more important. Audrey Hepburn was troubled with a number of insecurities: her large-sized nostrils, a crooked front tooth, and the fear of being kidnapped. So having her husband on the set helped calm her. But it was all to no avail, because Paramount Pictures did not release the film for 2 years. They left it on a shelf. And even when it was released, it got lukewarm reviews from the critics. Now let's return to Paris When It Sizzles. Time now on Red's Classic Theater for our weekly movie trivia quiz. In 1954, 10 years before making tonight's movie, Tony Curtis and director Richard Quine worked together on another film set in Paris. Can you name it? We'll be back with the answer in just a moment. And here's the answer to this week's movie trivia quiz. In 1954, 10 years before Paris When It Sizzles, director Richard Quine directed Tony Curtis in another film set in France called So This Is Paris. Now back to Tony Curtis in his uncredited role in Paris When It Sizzles. Next Sunday night on Red's Classic Theater, we'll ring in the new millennium with Willie Nelson taking on bandits, Apaches, bank agents, and Mexican soldiers in a wild search for a fortune in gold. Delta Burke also stars in Where the Hell's That Gold? Our movie next week on Red's Classic Theater. And that wraps up our show for the 20th century. Hope you enjoyed Paris When It Sizzles. I'll see you tomorrow morning on 650 Sea Isle, and if we survive the Y2K bug, next week here on Red's Classic Theater. From Library Square in downtown Vancouver, have a happy holiday, a happy new year, and a happy new millennium. Thanks for being with us. Good night, everybody. Paris When It Sizzles on Red's Classic Theater will continue. Paris When It Sizzles on Red's Classic Theater will continue. Paris When It Sizzles on Red's Classic Theater will continue. This week on Red's Classic Theater, William Holden and Audrey Hepburn star in Paris When It Sizzles at a special time, Sunday night at 9 here on TV 12. Tonight on Red's Classic Theater, William Holden and Audrey Hepburn star in Paris When It Sizzles at a special time, tonight at 9 here on TV 12. Paris When It Sizzles on Red's Classic Theater at a special time, Sunday night at 9. Paris When It Sizzles on Red's Classic Theater at a special time, tonight at 9.